At 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time on October 23, 2025, President Donald Trump posted a single message that sent shockwaves through Ontario's Queen's Park offices. All caps. No negotiation. All trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated. The reason? A $75 million advertising campaign featuring Ronald Reagan condemning tariffs, launched by Ontario Premier Doug Ford just 9 days earlier. But behind this diplomatic meltdown lies a deeper problem few are talking about. The crisis extends far beyond a single social media post or even one controversial advertisement. Ford's $75 million gamble represents a desperate attempt to influence American public opinion, as Ontario's economy hangs in the balance. The province sends 77% of its goods exports directly to the United States, generating 933,000 jobs, 1 out of every 9 positions in Ontario. Trump's February 2025 decision to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian goods implemented under a declared national emergency has already triggered a cascade of economic disruption across southwestern Ontario. Manufacturing employment dropped 3.5% in the second quarter of 2025 alone, while auto parts plants from Windsor to London announced layoffs affecting thousands of workers. Ford's Reagan advertisement campaign wasn't just political theater, it was an economic lifeline thrown to a drowning provincial economy. The numbers paint a stark picture of Ontario's vulnerability. In 2024, Ontario recorded a $4 billion trade deficit with the United States, as the province imported $236 billion in goods while exporting $220 billion back across the border. The Financial Accountability Office of Ontario estimates that U.S. export-related activities support 933,000 jobs across the province, representing 11.4% of total employment. Manufacturing leads this dependency, with 40% of the sector's total production shipped directly to American markets. Steel and aluminum producers export 25% of their output south, while automotive manufacturers send a staggering 80% of finished vehicles to U.S. dealerships. When Trump's tariffs struck in February 2025, targeting steel, aluminum, and automobile components with 25% duties, the impact rippled through Ontario's industrial heartland like a synchronized shockwave. The provincial government's own analysis projects 200 fewer jobs by 2026 if current tariff levels persist, with manufacturing bearing the heaviest burden at 57,700 lost positions. Sarah Chen sits at her kitchen table in Kitchener, reviewing spreadsheets on her laptop at 6 a.m. before her shift at an auto parts facility. The 34-year-old quality control supervisor earned $67,000 last year, supporting her family and paying a mortgage on their 3-bedroom home near Fisher-Hallman Road. Her plant produces brake components for Ford F-150 trucks assembled in Dearborn, Michigan, work that disappeared overnight when U.S. tariffs made their products uncompetitive. Sarah received her layoff notice in March 2025, joining 20,400 other workers from facilities across the Kitchener-Cambridge-Waterloo region. She calculates her employment insurance benefits at $1,890 monthly, barely covering her toughy $100 mortgage payment. Meanwhile, 43-year-old Michael Rodriguez watches inventory pile up at his steel distribution warehouse in Hamilton's industrial North End. His company imports $15 million worth of specialized alloys annually from Ohio suppliers, now facing 25% tariffs that add $3.75 million to operating costs. Michael laid off 12 of his 36 employees in June 2025, unable to pass the full price increase to Canadian manufacturers already struggling with reduced orders. Each terminated position represents a family earning between $45,000 and $58,000 annually, purchasing power vanishing from local economies in Hamilton, Burlington, and surrounding communities. Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced the advertising campaign on October 14, 2025, committing $75 million Canadian dollars over several months to broadcast Reagan's 1987 anti-tariff message across major U.S. television networks. The 30-second spot features archival footage of Reagan declaring, "We should beware of the demagogues who are ready to declare a trade war against our friends, weakening our economy, our national security, and the entire free world." Ford's communications team scheduled the advertisement to air during high viewership programming, including the World Series, targeting swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The premier defended the campaign as fighting fire with fire, attempting to reach American voters with their own conservative icons' words. Federal Finance Minister Mark Carney initially supported the provincial initiative, stating Canada remained ready to resume trade talks when Americans are ready. However, Trump's swift termination of negotiations caught even Ford's advisors off guard, forcing an immediate strategic reversal less than 24 hours after the president's late-night announcement. The trade relationship breakdown reveals fundamental systemic vulnerabilities built into North American economic integration over 3 decades. Ontario's manufacturing sector evolved around NAFTA assumptions of barrier-free access to U.S. markets, creating what economists term a synchronized supply chain dependency. Auto parts facilities in Windsor ship components to Detroit assembly plants within hours, while Hamilton steel mills calibrate production schedules to Michigan construction demand cycles. This integration created efficiency gains but eliminated redundancy. When tariff barriers disrupted these flows in 2025, alternative suppliers and markets couldn't absorb displaced volume quickly enough. The Financial Accountability Office describes this as a feedback loop of declining competitiveness, where tariff-induced cost increases reduce export volumes, lowering economies of scale and raising per-unit costs further. Historical precedent exists from the 1971 Nixon tariff shock, when temporary U.S. border measures triggered a recession across southern Ontario manufacturing communities. However, 2025's crisis differs in scope and duration. Trump's tariffs operate under permanent national emergency authority, removing the temporary nature that allowed previous recovery cycles. The economic damage concentrates heavily in southwestern Ontario, where manufacturing employment clusters around U.S. market access. Windsor faces the steepest projected employment decline at 1.6% by 2026, followed by Guelph at 1.6%. Brantford at 1.5%, and the Kitchener-Cambridge-Waterloo corridor at 1.5%. These communities built their economic base around automotive assembly, auto parts production, and steel processing, precisely the sectors targeted by Trump's February 2025 tariff orders. London expects 1.3% employment losses, while Toronto's more diversified service economy projects smaller but still significant impacts. Meanwhile, Alberta and Saskatchewan actually benefit from increased U.S. energy demand, as Trump's tariffs exclude oil and natural gas imports. British Columbia's lumber industry faces mixed results. Higher costs for U.S. homebuilders reduce demand, butteriff protection shields some domestic production. Quebec's aerospace and aluminum sectors experience severe disruption, though the province's manufacturing base remains smaller than Ontario's in absolute terms. Can Ontario's economy adapt to permanent trade barriers with its largest partner? Will Ford's political gamble with American public opinion succeed, or will continued escalation push more manufacturing jobs south of the border? How long can communities like Windsor, Kitchener, and Hamilton sustain unemployment rates above national averages while waiting for diplomatic breakthrough? The answers depend partly on whether Trump's trade policy maintains domestic U.S. support through 2026, and whether Canadian retaliation successfully pressures American agricultural and industrial constituencies. Alternative market development could provide partial relief, but redirecting $220 billion in annual exports requires years, not months, to achieve meaningful scale. Since February 2025, Ontario has lost 38,000 manufacturing jobs to U.S. tariff impacts, according to provincial labor statistics. The Financial Accountability Office projects total employment declining by 119,200 positions by 2026 if current trade barriers persist, with manufacturing accounting for 57,700 of those losses. Ford's $75 million advertising campaign represents 0.02% of Ontario's $394 billion annual economic output, a fraction that now appears insufficient to influence a trade relationship worth $456 billion in bilateral goods and services exchange. Trump's termination of negotiations over Reagan's televised words demonstrates how quickly economic relationships built over decades can unravel through political miscalculation, leaving nearly 1 million Ontario workers wondering whether their cross-border interdependence has become a permanent liability rather than a competitive advantage.